The morning sun ascended gradually over the plains of northeastern Europe, painting the landscape in a soft, golden hue. This serene light washed over fields soon destined to resound with the clash of steel and the cries of men. In the distance, banners, like restless birds poised for flight, fluttered faintly, hinting at the impending conflict. The vast expanse stretching between the villages of Grunwald and Tannenberg, silent for centuries, now bore the weight of fate. On this very ground, two powerful forces, each convinced of their righteous cause, marched inexorably toward a confrontation neither could avoid. The Polish-Lithuanian army stirred to life as the morning mist still clung to the earth. Soldiers spoke in hushed whispers, honing the edges of their blades or tying strips of cloth around their wrists, seeking a touch of luck. Horses snorted, their hooves impatiently stamping the dew-covered ground. The earthy scent of damp soil mingled with the smoky aroma of small morning fires, where men sought warmth, attempting to ward off the chill before the storm to come. Among these thousands moved King Ladislaw Jagiello, his presence understated, almost blending into the background. He preferred to observe, a keen eye studying the landscape before assuming the role of commander. Jagiello was not a man of bombastic authority. His thoughts ran deep, often concealed behind a calm gaze that examined the world with patient care. Today, however, a palpable heaviness weighed upon him. The Teutonic Order had ascended to immense power, perhaps too much, and for years had exerted its influence across the northern lands, often at the expense of pagans, Christians, and anyone who dared to resist their dominion. Jagiello had initially pursued diplomacy, hoping to avert bloodshed, but diplomacy had failed. The Order had challenged his kingdom, questioned his honor, insulted his allies, and now marched with an army forged for conquest. He understood that this battle transcended mere territorial disputes or wounded pride. It was about reshaping the balance of power in an entire region, and the immense responsibility of that truth pressed upon him like a heavy burden. But Jagiello was not alone in this fight. Near the Lithuanian encampments, Grand Duke Vytautas strode among his warriors with vigorous steps. Vytautas was a fire to Jagiello's water, bold, charismatic, and unafraid to display his strength to the world. He spoke with a booming voice, laughed freely, and struck the shields of his men with the flat of his hand, sending ripples of excitement through the ranks. His armor gleamed brilliantly in the early morning light, and even the horses seemed to stand taller in his presence. Despite their contrasting personalities, the two leaders shared a bond forged through a complex history, kinship, rivalry, friendship, and negotiation, but strengthened now by a shared purpose. Together, they commanded one of the largest armies Europe had ever assembled. Poles, Lithuanians, Ruthenians, Tartars, Czech mercenaries, and knights hailing from distant lands. A vibrant mosaic of banners rippled along the ridge where their encampment sprawled, creating a living tapestry of colors and symbols. But while the Polish-Lithuanian forces prepared at their own pace, the Teutonic Order stood only a few miles away, maintaining a disciplined silence. Their camps were meticulously organized, every tent precisely placed, every soldier trained to obey without hesitation. Grand Master Ulrich von Jungingen had arrived days earlier, his confidence bordering on absolute certainty. His knights were among the most elite warriors in Europe. Men raised under strict order, trained with unwavering discipline, and encased in steel from head to toe. Ulrich rose before dawn, stepping out into the crisp morning air. The white mantle adorned with a black cross hung from his shoulders, its edges fluttering gently in the breeze. He fixed his gaze upon the distant line of trees where he knew his enemies were gathering. His jaw tightened with resolve. For years, he firmly believed that his order had been divinely chosen to bring justice to the region. But this alliance, Poles and Lithuanians, challenged the very foundation of his worldview. He viewed them as a direct threat to the spiritual and political order he was sworn to defend. He returned to his command tent, where his officers awaited him. They spoke of battle strategies, potential advantages, and the promise of blessed victory. Yet beneath their confident words, a palpable tension simmered, for they were well aware that the opposing army outnumbered them. Numbers, however, had never deterred the Teutonic Knights. They firmly believed that their superior discipline, unwavering faith, and unmatched armor would overcome any disadvantage. As the sun climbed higher, its warming rays touched both encampments. Somewhere between them, a lone bird called out into the stillness, its voice brief and almost hesitant, as if aware of the momentous events that the day would bring. Soldiers on both sides paused to listen, though none spoke of it. Sometimes, the smallest sounds carried the weight of unspoken fears. By mid-morning, Jagiello stood upon a gentle hill, observing the movements of his forces. Vytautas joined him, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. The order will not wait long, Vytautas predicted. Ulrich is eager to prove divine favor. Jagiello nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. Eagerness can cloud judgment, he observed. Vytautas smirked, a hint of amusement in his eyes. True, but it also makes men predictable. The king allowed himself a faint smile. For a brief moment, the tension between them eased. Two leaders, so different in temperament, yet so united in purpose. As the breeze shifted, a distant sound reached them, the low rumble of armored horsemen adjusting their positions. The Teutonic army was preparing to move. Jagiello closed his eyes briefly, sensing the pulse of the land beneath his feet. This field had witnessed countless seasons come and go for centuries, untouched by great conflict. Today, it would bear witness to history and bloodshed. He opened his eyes, his gaze resolute. Tell the men to eat. Tell them to be patient. The order will make the first move. Vytautas nodded in understanding and descended the hill, his cape swirling behind him like the tail of a comet. Jagiello remained for a moment longer, his thoughts turning to his people, to the fragile peace he hoped to secure. He offered prayer, not as a king, but as a man, for strength, for clarity, and for a victory that would usher in a period of calmer times. Across the field, Grand Master Ulrich mounted his warhorse, its armor gleaming with polished metal plates. His knights formed immaculate lines, their shields reflecting the sunlight like 1,000 mirrors. A palpable sense of unwavering purpose emanated from them. Ulrich drew his sword and pointed it toward the distant hill where the Polish king stood. Today, he declared in a voice that carried across the ranks, we shall strike down the enemies of the order and cleanse this land. His words ignited a fervent passion within his men. Drums thundered, banners snapped and whipped in the wind. And so, as the day approached its zenith, both armies faced one another across the open plain. Thousands of hearts beating with anticipation, thousands of lives poised to change forever. The initial steps toward the inevitable clash had begun. Quiet yet heavy, like the drawing of a long breath before the world exhaled into chaos. The Battle of Grunwald had not yet erupted in full force, but its shadow had already fallen across every soul present on that fateful field. By the time the Polish-Lithuanian army had fully deployed into its initial wide arcs, the sun had reached its zenith, bathing the battlefield in its full, intense light. The air shimmered with heat, yet beneath the warmth lay a tension so thick it seemed to stifle breath itself. Thin trails of dust rose as horses shifted nervously, and the collective murmurs of thousands of soldiers blended into a single, low hum that resonated across the plain. Everything felt suspended, quiet, but far from peaceful. Vytautas, mounted on a steed, rode along the Lithuanian lines, his horse's hooves drumming softly against the earth. The sunlight glinted off the curved shields as cavalry, the lightly armored Tatars, the Ruthenians in their heavier coats of mail, and the Lithuanian nobles, their banners emblazoned with pagan symbols that spoke of ancient traditions. For many of his warriors, this battle was more than just a matter of politics. It was a confrontation with a long-standing foe who had cast a dark shadow over their ancestral lands. He raised his hand, and the men quieted further, holding their breath in anticipation. He studied their faces, weathered, stern, hopeful, and fearful. Even the bravest among them carried a flicker of uncertainty before the impending storm. But that flicker was something Vytautas knew how to ignite. "You stand here," he finally declared, his voice steady but loud enough to carry, not as scattered peoples, not as fragmented tribes, but as a unified force. Our enemies believe that discipline alone determines victory. They will soon learn that heart decides far more. The warriors responded with a rising shout, brief but powerful, as if releasing the breath they had been holding since dawn. Not far away, the Polish ranks were settling into their positions, watched over by their seasoned commanders. Heavy cavalry and polished armor stood ready, Men whose families had fought for generations, each shield bearing a legacy of hardship and honor. Behind them, lighter troops prepared their spears and bows, whispering quiet prayers for strength and protection. Some clutched small token from home, braided cloth, carved wooden figures, or rings worn thin by years of labor. Every soldier carried not just weapons, but also cherished memories, fervent hopes, and solemn promises to return home. Jagiello observed everything from a hilltop that served as a command post, his calm presence acting as an anchor against the shifting tide of nerves below. Though he held supreme authority over the entire coalition, he refrained from riding out to the front lines like Vytautas. Instead, he directed the flow of the army with unwavering patience, always waiting for the opportune moment. His commanders approached him periodically with vital reports. Movement from the Teutonic right flank, patterns of dust near their reserves, adjustments to their battle lines. But the king remained steadfast and unhurried. He understood the Teutonic order all too well. Their strength lay not only in their formidable armor, but also in their unwavering belief that they could force their enemy to move prematurely. Jagiello refused to grant them that advantage. Meanwhile, on the opposite side of the field, Grand Master Ulrich von Jungingen commenced his final preparations. His white cloak fluttered dramatically as he rode between the rigid rows of his knights. Their armor gleamed like sculpted silver, and their horses were draped in chainmail that shone menacingly in the sun. To an outside observer, the Teutonic lines appeared almost surreal, too orderly, too flawless, as if they had been carved from a single block of solid steel. Ulrich felt a surge of pride swell within his chest as he surveyed his forces. The Order's elite knights stood poised on wings, with infantry and crossbowmen arrayed in orderly squares behind them. The Grand Master was convinced that the enemy's diversity was their inherent weakness. Too many languages, too many customs, too many conflicting banners. He, on the other hand, commanded unwavering unity, iron discipline, and an unbreakable belief in their divine mission. Let them wait, Ulrich muttered under his breath. Let them feel the crushing weight of our silence. But even within the Teutonic camp, the immense pressure of the approaching battle could be felt. Several knights tightened their grips on their lances, their knuckles white with tension. Others glanced uneasily toward the horizon, imagining the devastating charge to come. Horses tossed their heads, restless as if sensing the storm brewing in the hearts of men. Sometime past midday, the first unexpected sign of motion appeared. A Teutonic envoy rode out toward the Polish-Lithuanian lines, bearing 2 swords, symbols intended to taunt and challenge their enemy. The swords glinted coldly, as if mocking the calm composure of the waiting king. The envoy's voice echoed across the field as he delivered his provocative message. These swords we offer you, as you seem to lack the courage to initiate the battle. The words rippled through the Polish lines like a sharp sting. Soldiers bristled with anger. Even seasoned commanders exchanged uneasy glances. Insults were commonplace in war, but this one struck a particularly deep nerve. Yet Jagiello remained unperturbed. He accepted the swords without rising from his seat and replied simply, "We accept your swords. They will serve us well." The envoy rode away, his composure shaken by the king's quiet confidence. And the mocking gift, intended to ignite fear, instead stirred a newfound resolve within the Polish-Lithuanian ranks. Down below, Vytautas shifted in his saddle, his eyes alight with fierce amusement. "They want us to break formation," he said to a nearby commander. "They want us to become impatient." Jagiello spoke calmly, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "Then we shall give them patience." As the afternoon deepened, shadows began to stretch across the field, and the oppressive heat softened slightly. The Teutonic order could wait no longer. Drums thundered. Horns split the air with commanding notes that rolled across the plain like distant thunder. The Teutonic infantry marched forward first, tight blocks of men moving as one entity. Their heavy shields advanced in steady rhythm, spears angling outward like sharpened teeth. Crossbowmen followed closely behind, preparing for the opening salvo of projectiles. The ground trembled beneath the weight of their advance. For a fleeting heartbeat, silence descended once more, an eerie, breathless pause as if the world itself had inhaled in anticipation. Then came the first wave of crossbow bolts. They whistled through the air with deadly precision, streaking toward the Lithuanian light cavalry. Shields rose in defense. Horses reared in panic. Some men cried out as the bolts found their marks. Yet even under the sudden and fierce assault, Vytautas held his ground and did not order a charge. Instead, he commanded his front lines to shift, absorbing the attacks with a controlled and calculated retreat. The Teutonic infantry advanced further, emboldened by what they perceived to be a sign of weakness. From his vantage point on the hilltop, Jagiello watched every movement, every shift of dust, every ripple of hesitation within the enemy lines. The Teutonic order was committing too early, too rigidly, and their eagerness to break the Lithuanian flank was clouding their normally disciplined judgment. Vytautas maneuvered with practiced fluidity, drawing the enemy forward without allowing them to gain any real advantage. His cavalry bent, but did not break. It was like watching a river float around a stone, flexible, resilient, and refusing to be trapped. In the Teutonic camp, Ulrich grew increasingly eager. His gauntlet hand clenched tightly around his reins. "Forward!" he shouted to his heavy cavalry. "Crush them before they scatter." The signal was given, and with that, the first great wave of Teutonic Knights lowered their lances and urged their war horses toward the Lithuanian right flank. The full weight of the order, steel, speed, and unbridled fury, began its inexorable descent. The battle had finally erupted in all its terrifying glory, and the field of Grunwald, silent since the early hours of the morning, roared to life with the sounds of war. Dawn broke over the ravaged field of Grunwald like a slow-breathing giant stirring from slumber, casting long, amber rays of light across the dew-soaked grass. The mist, reluctant to yield, lifted in thin, ethereal layers, revealing the stark silhouettes of thousands. Soldiers, tattered banners, and weary horses, all momentarily frozen in the early morning calm before the next wave of fury crashed upon them. In those fleeting moments, time seemed to hang suspended, as if the land itself inhaled deeply and waited with bated breath. The Polish-Lithuanian forces stood in broad, sprawling formations, adjusting their positions after the exhausting and brutal clashes of the previous hours. Some soldiers whispered fervent prayers, seeking divine protection and strength. Others meticulously sharpened the edges of their blades, worn dull by shield rims and splintered armor. And still others simply stared across the ravaged landscape at the distant white cloaks of the Teutonic Knights, fluttering like ominous wings against the horizon. Though both armies had suffered heavy losses, a palpable sense hung in the air that the fiercest and most decisive part of the battle was yet to come. Grand Duke Vytautas, mounted on his war horse, rode along the Lithuanian lines, his steed snorting plumes of steam into the crisp morning air, his voice resonating with a calm strength, carried across the ranks as he reminded his men of their purpose, of the sacred lands and the cherished families they were sworn to defend. His strategic brilliance, characterized by its fluid and unpredictable nature, had so far forced the Teutonic Knights to stretch their formations precariously thin, though they remained a formidable force, unyielding, disciplined, and heavily armored. Not far behind, King Ladislaw Jagiello surveyed the vast battlefield from his position atop a gentle rise in the land. His expression remained unreadable, almost serene, yet beneath that veneer of outward calm, his mind raced with constant calculation. Every movement of the enemy, every shifting cluster of banners, every faint plume of dust carried significance and mattered deeply. His officers came and went in a steady stream, carrying urgent messages from the wings of the army, relaying critical updates about weapon reserves, troop positions, levels of fatigue, and overall morale. Jagiello listened intently to each report, absorbing every detail with unwavering focus. Yet he never allowed the urgency of the situation to disrupt the tranquility of his presence. Meanwhile, on the Teutonic side of the field, Grand Master Ulrich von Jungingen made his final preparations for what he firmly believed would be the decisive push that would shatter the enemy and secure victory. He was a warrior forged from unwavering certainty, a man carved from rigid lines of discipline and unbending convictions. The humiliation of witnessing his elite heavy cavalry stalled and frustrated by the Lithuanians earlier in the day gnawed at his pride. He sought not merely a hard-fought victory, but crushing triumph that would resonate across the entire continent of Europe, solidifying the dominance of the Teutonic order. He donned a crimson surcoat, meticulously embroidered with a distinctive cross insignia of the order, a powerful symbol intended to inspire unwavering loyalty in his men, and to instill fear and intimidation in his enemies. Behind him, the elite Teutonic Knights assembled in their ranks, towering figures encased in steel and exuding an aura of unwavering discipline. Their war horses, heavily armored and restless with anticipation, pawed at the earth, eager to be unleashed. Squires meticulously adjusted helm clasps, tightened saddle cinches, and handed up lances that were nearly twice the height of a man. The sheer weight of the assembled force felt like a gathering storm, silent but immense, waiting to unleash its full fury. Back on the Polish-Lithuanian lines, the moment of relative calm was suddenly shattered. A Teutonic horn sounded, a long, sharp, and unyielding blast that cut to the morning air like a honed blade. Banners shifted in response. A palpable sense of movement rippled across the enemy ranks. Then, the ground began to tremble. The Teutonic heavy cavalry, arranged in a massive, wedge-shaped formation, began its inexorable advance. The thunder of hooves rolled across the plain, growing in intensity with each passing second until it felt like the very heartbeat of the earth itself. Sunlight glinted off the polished surfaces of their armor, creating a blinding wave of flashes that seemed to herald their arrival. It was not merely a charge. It was a bold declaration of overwhelming power, a testament to the might of the Teutonic Order. Vytautas reacted immediately, his years of experience guiding his decisions. He spurred his horse forward, riding to the Lithuanian front lines, and shouted orders to tighten the ranks, creating a more solid defensive wall. Messengers galloped swiftly to the Tatar units positioned on the flanks, instructing them to prepare for a sudden and strategic dispersal, a tactic designed to disrupt the enemy's advance. The Lithuanian cavalry, known for their swiftness and agility, subtly shifted their positions, creating deceptive pockets of space, an illusion of weakness intended to lure the enemy deeper into a carefully prepared trap. When the Teutonic wedge finally struck, the impact was like a colossal hammer falling upon an anvil. Shields splintered and shattered under the force of the blow. Men were thrown aside like rag dolls. War horses collided with terrifying force, their screams piercing the air. The initial impact rippled backward through the Lithuanian lines, but instead of collapsing and breaking, they bent and absorbed a devastating strike, yielding strategically but never shattering. The battlefield erupted into a scene of utter chaos, the deafening clash of metal upon metal, the thunderous roar of hooves pounding the earth, and the desperate cries of men rising in a cacophony of sound. Lithuanian light cavalry swirled around the advancing Teutonic Knights like living currents, striking swiftly at any openings they could find, vanishing into melee, and then reappearing on the flanks to harass and disrupt the enemy. Arrows rained down from multiple directions, thudding against shields and armor with relentless force. Yet the Teutonic wedge pushed forward relentlessly, carving a brutal path of destruction toward the Polish center, their momentum seemingly unstoppable. Jagiello, from his unwavering vantage point, watched every movement of the battle unfold with unwavering focus. Officers beseeched him for immediate reinforcement orders, their voices filled with urgency, but he simply raised a hand, signaling them to maintain their patience and trust in the plan. He recognized the strategic brilliance of Vytautas' maneuver unfolding before his eyes, the deliberate and calculated retreat of certain Lithuanian units, not born of panic but of careful planning. The relentless charge of the Teutonic Knights was stretching their formation, pulling them deeper and deeper into unfavorable terrain, away from their support lines. Still, the pressure on the Polish-Lithuanian forces was immense, threatening to overwhelm them. The Teutonic Knights, fueled by their unwavering belief in their cause, rallied behind Ulrich's banner, gaining momentum as they relentlessly cut through the Lithuanian lines. Their battle cries rose above the deafening din of combat, fierce and unshaken, a testament to their unwavering resolve. Vytautas, recognizing the critical moment, spurred his horse forward and led a counterattack, his very presence igniting the fighting spirit of his men. The Lithuanians surged forward once more, clashing anew with the exhausted enemy in a renewed frenzy of violence. The Teutonic advance faltered, just slightly, but enough to shift the momentum of the battle, if only for a moment. Then, from the Polish side, the banners of the Smolensk units moved forward, a sight that bolstered the spirits of their comrades. These soldiers, battle-hardened and fiercely loyal to their king, had already endured some of the worst fighting earlier in the day, sustaining grievous wounds and suffering heavy losses. Yet they stepped forward once more into the chaotic fray, forming a stubborn and unyielding barrier against a relentless Teutonic charge. The clash that followed was devastating in its intensity. Steel met steel in violent bursts of sparks. War horses screamed in agony. The ground churned beneath the combined weight of bodies and armor. The overwhelming smell of sweat, blood, trampled grass, and hot iron filled the air, a testament to the brutal nature of the conflict. Commanders shouted in vain, attempting to be heard over the deafening tumult. But oft it was raw instinct that drove the fighters now, instinct and the desperate will endure against all odds. At the very center of the chaotic battle, a strange and unexpected moment occurred. A sudden gust of wind swept across the field, lifting dust and grass into spiraling shapes, momentarily obscuring everything from view. For a fleeting heartbeat, both sides fought half-blind, silhouettes clashing in a disorienting blur. When the wind finally passed, the battlefield reappeared, transformed by the chaos. The Teutonic wedge, once sharp and well-defined, now sagged and buckled under the relentless pressure from all sides. Lithuanian cavalry harassed the flanks relentlessly, striking with lightning speed and then vanishing. Polish infantry advanced in disciplined waves, pushing forward with unwavering determination, and the Smolensk regiments held firm at the center, refusing to yield even an inch, even as their ranks visibly thinned before the onslaught. Grand Master Ulrich von Jungingen saw the shift in momentum and knew that the critical moment was slipping away from his grasp. He raised his sword high, rallying his knights for another desperate push, hoping to regain the initiative. But before he could fully reorganize his forces, the Lithuanian units that had withdrawn earlier in the day suddenly reappeared on the far flank, reformed, refreshed, and burning with a renewed desire for victory. Vytautas had executed his complex maneuver perfectly, luring the enemy into a trap and then springing it with deadly precision. The pressure on the Teutonic side intensified dramatically. They were now surrounded on multiple fronts, stretched thin, and rapidly losing cohesion. Still, they fought with the ferocity of warriors who understood the catastrophic consequences of defeat. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the field roared with the unending struggle. And though the outcome of the battle remained uncertain, a subtle but unmistakable shift hung in the air, a feeling that something profound was turning. The next phase of the battle would decide everything, determining the fate of thousands and shaping the future of the region. The relentless hours of battle had carved deep and lasting grooves across the field of Grunwald, transforming the once peaceful plain into a scarred and desolate landscape of torn earth, broken weapons, and the fallen. The sun had now ascended to its highest point in the sky, warming the blood-soaked ground and casting long, sharp shadows of men locked in a desperate struggle for survival. Though bone-wearing exhaustion weighed heavily on every soldier like an invisible chain, neither side showed any signs of surrendering or yielding. The fight had reached a fevered pitch, a crescendo of violence and desperation. King Jagiello, still stationed at his elevated vantage point beneath the Lone, sentinel tree on the hill, watched the unfolding drama of the battlefield with renewed intensity. Reports reached him rapidly now, messengers racing up the slope with breathless urgency. The Lithuanian units had returned to the fray, their fresh attacks pressing relentlessly on the Teutonic flanks. The once mighty Teutonic wedge had begun to fracture and crumble under the combined pressure. Jagiello listened to everything with unwavering focus, his outward calm unbroken. Yet within him a critical decision was beginning to take shape. The moment he had patiently waited for was drawing near. Down on the field, Grand Duke Vytautas charged at the head of the Lithuanian cavalry, his distinctive banner snapping wildly in the wind, a symbol of defiance and resistance. His war horse's hooves pounded the earth as he fearlessly cut through the chaos, directing his men with swift, decisive gestures as sharp as steel. The Lithuanian troops, energized by their earlier withdrawal and regrouping, now struck with renewed vigor, their attacks fueled by a burning desire for victory. They slammed into the exposed edges of the Teutonic formations, harassing, isolating, and exhausting the enemy with relentless ferocity. Across the ravaged field, the Teutonic warriors fought with desperate determination, clinging to their dwindling hope of victory. Their white cloaks, once pristine symbols of discipline, order, and a divine mission, were now stained with mud and blood, testaments to the brutal reality of war. Many knights who had begun the day filled with unwavering confidence and pride now found themselves surrounded, their war horses tiring beneath them, their heavy armor growing unbearably burdensome. Still, their training was ingrained deep within them, a bedrock of iron-strong discipline. They battled in tight, defensive clusters back to back, refusing to yield even an inch of ground. Grand Master Ulrich von Jungingen, his towering figure clad in his crimson surcoat, rode fearlessly forward to the thickest fighting, a beacon of defiance amidst the chaos. His very presence was like a flare in the storm, bold, unmistakable, and defiant. Wherever his banner was carried, Teutonic Knights rallied, bolstering their resolve. Ulrich's voice, amplified by the force's will, carried across the clash of steel, commanding his men to regroup, reform their lines, and strike again with renewed ferocity. But the battlefield was no longer the ordered theater of war that he preferred. It had devolved into a chaotic labyrinth of swirling engagements, broken lines, and sudden ambushes. On the Polish side, the infantry pressed forward in disciplined formations, their steady advance a testament to their training and unwavering resolve. Their shields rose and fell in unison, pushing steadily against the tenacious Teutonic resistance. The Smolensk regiments, their ranks thinned by wounds and death, but their spirit unbroken, fought like anchors in the very heart of the lines, holding the ground against a relentless onslaught. Their unwavering courage forced the Teutonic advance to slow, then falter, then ultimately begin to fracture under the strain. Each minute they held, each foot of ground they defended, was a minute and a foot stolen from the Teutonic momentum. Then came a subtle but unmistakable shift in the battle, a turning of the tide that would ultimately seal the fate of the day. A large unit of Teutonic Knights attempted to break through the Polish lines and advanced directly toward Jagiello's Hill, perhaps hoping to strike the Polish command directly and disrupt their overall coordination. It was a bold and exceedingly dangerous move, and if successful, it could potentially shatter the entire Polish-Lithuanian alliance and snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. Jagiello saw the unfolding maneuver immediately, his keen eyes missing nothing. Without hesitation, he sent word to the Polish heavy cavalry. The banners of Krakow, Poznan, and Sandomierz, the elite of his forces. For hours, they had remained in reserve behind the infantry lines, their gleaming armor catching the sunlight, their powerful war horses snorting with pent-up energy, eager to be unleashed. Now, at last, the king gave the signal they had been waiting for. The Polish cavalry moved forward, the earth trembling beneath their hooves. Slowly at first, then faster and faster, gathering unstoppable speed as they crested the rise and descended toward the Teutonic units, attempting their daring breakthrough. Their formation tightened into a dense, impenetrable wall of muscle and steel. Sunlight flashed brilliantly on the tips of their lances, creating the illusion of stars falling to earth. And then, the moment of impact arrived with earth-shattering force. The sound was like a thunderclap that ripped across the battlefield. War horses collided with bone-crushing force. Shields buckled and shattered. Lances splintered into 1,000 pieces. The Polish heavy cavalry swept into the Teutonic ranks with overwhelming force, completely smashing the enemy's desperate attempt at breaking through toward the command hill. The ground shook from the sheer violence of the charge, a testament to the power of well-timed and decisive action. Yet Ulrich von Jungingen, a warrior of unyielding resolve, refused to accept defeat, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Seeing his men push back and teetering on the brink of collapse, he called forth his personal guard, the most elite and heavily armored knights of the entire Teutonic order. These warriors, clad in the heaviest plate armor and wielding massive broadswords capable of cleaving through shields, form an unbreakable circle around him, a bastion of unwavering strength. Together, they surged forward toward the heart of the Polish lines, hoping to shatter the center and create enough chaos to turn the tide of the battle back in their favor. For a fleeting moment, it looked as though they might actually succeed in their audacious plan. Their relentless advance was like a tidal wave, threatening to engulf everything in its path. The Teutonic steel advanced, slow, massive, and relentless. The Polish infantry yielded ground, gaps tearing through their lines. Urgent horn blasts echoed across the battlefield, a desperate warning. Vytautas, however, recognized the peril. He swiftly wheeled his cavalry, leading them in a charge across the flanks, aiming for the vulnerable sides of Ulrich's advancing guard. Arrows rained down on the Teutonic ranks, while Lithuanian riders darted in and out, targeting the exposed joints in their armor. Yet Ulrich pressed onward, his sword rising and falling with fearsome power. Then, a moment of stillness seemed to grip the battlefield. Two great commanders, Vytautas and Ulrich, caught sight of each other amidst the chaos. Their eyes locked for a breathless instant, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. The realization that one of them would determine the day's outcome. It wasn't personal hatred that sparked between them, but a shared understanding of the immense stakes. Ulrich spurred his horse forward. Vytautas leaned in, ready to meet him. But before they could clash, the ground trembled anew, this time from the opposite direction. Jagiello had unleashed his final reserve, the Royal Guard and the elite knights of Poland. They thundered into battle from the rear, their arrival like a rolling wave of steel that crashed against the Teutonic lines precisely as Ulrich pressed his attack. Caught between Vytautas' cavalry on one side and the Polish elite on the other, the Teutonic formation began to buckle. Their lines broke apart, their cohesion shattered. Men who had fought with unwavering discipline now struggled simply to remain standing against the converging forces. Ulrich von Jungingen, refusing to retreat, rode directly into the heart of the fighting. His sword flashed, cutting down any who dared to impede his path. But the momentum had irrevocably shifted. Arrows found their mark, striking his armor. A spear glanced off his shoulder. A Polish knight blocked his advance. Then another. Still, he fought with unwavering ferocity. Still, he roared commands, attempting to rally his men. And still, the circle around him tightened. As dust filled the air, voices rose in a cacophony of triumph and despair. Horses stumbled and fell. Shields splintered and cracked. Within that swirling chaos, the fate of the Teutonic Order edged ever closer to a single, irreversible moment. The battle was reaching its breaking point. The fall of the Grand Master was imminent, and when it came, the entire field would transform. The battlefield of Grunwald, once resounding with the thunder of hooves and the clash of steel, fell into a heavy silence. A quiet wind swept across the trampled fields, carrying the scent of churned earth, broken shields, and the faint sorrow that inevitably followed in the wake of war. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, its fading light stretched over the remnants of what had been one of the largest battles medieval Europe had ever witnessed. For the Ladislaw Jagiello and the allied armies of Poland, Lithuania, the victory was undeniable. The Teutonic Order had suffered a devastating defeat. Their Grand Master, Ulrich von Jungingen, lay dead. Many of their commanders had fallen, and their once formidable ranks were scattered like leaves after a storm. But the victory did not carry the triumphant resonance of tales told in songs of old. Instead, it felt like a deep, trembling breath taken after a long and merciless struggle. Prince Vytautas stood near a broken wagon wheel, watching the smoke curl upwards from small fires where soldiers warmed their hands, tended to their wounds, or whispered quiet prayers. His armor was scratched and streaked with dust and sweat, yet his posture remained composed. He had led countless charges that day, swift, decisive movements that had shattered the Teutonic lines. And now, as exhaustion replaced adrenaline, he allowed himself a solitary moment of stillness. Nearby, a group of Lithuanian horsemen gathered around their fallen banners, lifting them carefully as if they were tending to wounded comrades. Polish knights knelt beside their companions, removing helmets and wiping faces with reverence. Between them, there was no triumphal boasting, only the unspoken acknowledgement that war, even in victory, exacted a heavy toll, carving something out of every soul it touched. Jagiello approached slowly, his cloak brushing against the torn grass. His voice, gentle and low, broke the silence. "It is over," he murmured. "Today will be remembered for centuries to come." Vytautas offered a faint smile. "Battles are remembered, yes, but the men, we must not forget them either." The king nodded in agreement. His gaze drifted across the wide fields, where the last rays of daylight clung to abandoned swords and broken lances. The Order believed their walls, their armor, their rigid discipline would render them invincible. But no fortress can stand against a people who are united in their fight. And yet, Vytautas added softly. Even the most resounding victory casts long shadows. Night approached, casting indigo hues across the ravaged land. Torches flickered like small, unwavering stars. In the distance, monks walked among the fallen, whispering prayers for both friend and foe, offering solace to the dying and the dead. Jagiello watched them with a somber calm. "We must proceed with caution," he continued. "Marienburg still stands. The war is not yet fully concluded." Vytautas exhaled slowly. "Yes, that's true. But Grunwald has shattered the Order's aura of invincibility. Their arrogance has been broken on this field." A faint breeze stirred once more. The two leaders stood without speaking, sharing a moment more humbling than any triumph, an understanding that history rarely bestows victories without a significant weight of sacrifice and consequence. As darkness fully descended, the Allied camps came alive with softer sounds. The quiet murmurs of healing, the crackling of firewood, the rhythmic clinking of armor as soldiers prepared for a night's rest. A group of young Lithuanian archers exchanged stories, their laughter subdued and gentle rather than jubilant. They spoke not of slaying enemies but of surviving, of witnessing the dawn again. On the Polish side, an old knight sat meticulously polishing his dented shield, restoring its luster. A young squire approached him timidly. "Sir," the boy asked, "is this what victory truly feels like?" The knight paused, looking into the flickering fire. "No," he whispered. "This is what the end of a long-held fear feels like. Lad, true victory. That comes later, when lasting peace takes root and flourishes." The boy nodded, absorbing words far larger than his youthful years. Far from the comforting warmth of the fires, the stars slowly emerged, revealing themselves in the darkening sky. They hung over the battlefield like silent witnesses, observing the fragile calm unfolding below. Jagiello walked alone for a moment, allowing the cool air to brush against his tired face. He thought of the coming days, the march toward the remaining Teutonic strongholds, the negotiations that would shape the new borders, the chronicles that would attempt to capture the immensity of this day. But none of those weighty thoughts lingered for long. Instead, his mind drifted to something far simpler, a quiet prayer that such a devastating battle might never again be necessary. Vytautas joined him once more, his footsteps soft and nearly silent. "The men will sleep deeply tonight, King. Let them," Jagiello replied wearily, "for they have carried the fate of Europe on their shoulders this day." They exchanged a tired smile, a silent acknowledgement of shared burdens. A messenger arrived, bowing deeply before them. "My lords, scouts report the remaining Teutonic forces are in full retreat toward Marienburg." They moved slowly, disorganized and demoralized. Jagiello nodded slowly. "We will address them soon enough. But tonight belongs to those who survived this day's ordeal." The messenger withdrew respectfully. Vytautas looked up at the sky, where thin clouds drifted like pale ghosts in the moonlight. "History will paint this day in glorious gold," he said quietly. "But we will remember the somber gray that underlays it. Perhaps that is precisely why peace must be built with such careful consideration and unwavering dedication." Jagiello answered, his voice soft. The night grew deeper and more encompassing. The flames of the campfires rose higher and brighter, pushing back against the encroaching darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a soft song began, a melody carried from one camp to another, low and soothing, like a lullaby for weary warriors. It spoke of home, of fields untouched by the ravages of war, of the deep yearning to return to simpler, quieter lives. The song moved Jagiello in a way he had not anticipated. He closed his eyes briefly, feeling the oppressive weight of the crown of leadership, of the immense responsibility he bore. When he opened them again, the battlefield no longer seemed like merely a place of death and destruction, but also a place where fate had shifted, where the course of Europe had irrevocably changed direction. "Tomorrow," he said gently, with newfound resolve, "we begin again." Vytautas nodded in agreement. Together, as always. And so the night settled over Grunwald, over soldiers sleeping in uneven rows, over banners leaned carefully against spears, over the crushing weight of a day that would echo through the centuries. The wind softened to a gentle whisper. The fires burned low, their light fading. Peace had not yet fully arrived, but the door to it had been forced open, however violently. And through that doorway, the future waited, quiet, uncertain, and filled with enduring hope that all great victories seek to earn and protect.